I think excellence is a difficult word in the same sense of success. Everything's hard. Nothing is easy.
And then suddenly someone says, oh my God, you're this overnight success. And you're like, no. It's been like 5 years of nothing.
Your network is your net worth.
Welcome to the next episode of the Entrepreneurial Excellence Podcast. It is with great pleasure I have with me Mitch Joel. He began his career in the music industry, co-founding magazines Arena Rock, Enraged, a record label, helping artists all find their voice. Then as an internet rewired media and marketing guru. And today you're here because you're decoding kind of what's the big thing that's next when it comes to this media landscape. As the co-founder of Thinkers One, a platform for redefining how companies bring the world's smartest thinkers into their meetings, events, and culture. And you're helping teams learn at the speed of business. And I want to define what even that means, because not all businesses move that fast. But also, you're the host of Thinking with Mitch Joel. Had weekly conversations for nearly 2 decades with some of the world's most fascinating minds in business, innovation, and consumer behavior. I believe, and then finally, to round this out, you've been named one of Thinkers 50 Radar, Dr. Marshall Goldsmith's 100 Coaches, the author of 2 different books, 6 Pixels of Separation and Control, Alt, Delete. You transformed leadership in the digital era. So Mitch Joel has spent nearly 3 decades at the intersection of content, commerce, and community, helping brands and leaders embrace disruption and human thought throughout. Mitch, I know I'm going to learn a ton, so thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you. Thank you for such a generous introduction. I sit here blushing and smirking because I don't know what to do in those awkward introductions that I'm forced to endure, but thank you.
Absolutely. The first thing I ask every guest is a simple but also difficult question. You've worked with probably thousands of entrepreneurs, and you are, of course, one yourself. How do you define entrepreneurial excellence? What does excellence mean to you, quote unquote?
Excellence is a difficult word. And I think excellence is a difficult word in the same sense of success. I think all of those are very personalized. And I think the personalization of those definitions are primarily driven by the individual, culture, geography, where you sit, where you are, a lot of luck, a lot of that. And I actually have 2 answers to this. One answer would have been entrepreneurial success is the individual's ability to wake up every morning and know that they are creating their economic value and are essentially solely responsible for that as a direction and a force of momentum in their professional lives. Like that would be my general way of thinking about it. But I will admit that through the course of those 1,000 plus conversations for my podcast, that in conversation with someone, I believe it was from Harvard, who runs their entrepreneurial program, their attitude was an entrepreneur is essentially a business leader creating economic value. And I thought, oh, that's like a really, and the reason I was hemming and hawing about that is because when I was younger, part of my role, volunteer-wise, community-wise, was to be part of these entrepreneurial awards. And I would sit in that room and candidly hem and haw about 2nd generation, 3rd generation kids of successful entrepreneurs who are being awarded these awards. I thought that doesn't work for me. But obviously, when you scratch beneath that surface, you have some of them that took a interesting business and scaled it hugely. You have some of them that completely transformed the industry through their technology and technological initiatives. So I do kind of like this idea that it's a leader who is creating some form of economic value. It's an interesting way to think about it and simplify it, maybe.
Yeah, it does. It does actually simplify it in some ways to say it's economic value of some sort, because there's lots of entrepreneurs, and of course, many, 90% or something fail. So many don't create economic value.
Yeah, or some of them are essentially solopreneurs or self-employed. And that was the other issue, where you have a lot of people who are just really happy running a business where they're earning equal to or a little bit more than what they would have made had they just worked for somebody else in that forum. And they're really satiated. They're enjoying life. They're not necessarily looking for growth, employees, global domination, regional domination. My instinct from young and always wanting to do this was kind of in the vein of go big. Try to make this as big. If you're going to put in these 7, 8, 9 hours a day, why not do it at its fullest potential? And again, the word potential becomes the problem, because what does that mean? For some people, that is the potential. Like, I don't have to go work for somebody. That is my fullest potential. So it's a tough conversation.
It is. I mean, I would say probably our audience is much more focused on what is the sort of growth potential. Let's say, like, what does that actually look like and how do you achieve it? But I agree with you. Every person's also different, and you can define it in different ways. So speaking of that and thinking through that, like that potential, how do you grow that, right? You've done this a number of times for your own business and sort of for yourself in a lot of different ways. How did you achieve that growth potential? Like, what do you think set you apart if you think through your peers and things that you've done differently? Why have you had, however you define success, but I think by most definitions, even just reading through that intro, most people would define you as a pretty successful individual and if not entrepreneur.
Fear and insecurity. That was mine. It was fear in the sense of I decided at a very young age that while I was in my first semester of college, that I was at the same time publishing one of the music magazines we're talking about, that I was going to leave and try to pursue this entrepreneurial music business type of media thing that I was interested in. Thankfully, had the support of parents who agreed with the caveat of, you are telling us that if this doesn't work out, you will go back to school and get your university college degree. And I said, yeah, of course I would, and never did. So there's a bit of fear.
But their parents pretty proud of you in the end.
I hope so. I mean, you want to hope that, what's the story at the end of all the therapy you're going to do? You're going to lie on the couch and just try and figure out if it's because your parents were overly bearing on you or not bearing enough lying. That's how therapy works. So the fear was this idea of I don't have what other haves. And that's the insecurity a little bit too. This idea that I don't have a college degree, I don't have an MBA. And that led me to a place where I think I was able to outmaneuver that, understanding what it is and then saying, I'm going to outread people. I'm going to out-curious people. I'm going to stay at the forefront of technology. I've seen people age and get older and then kind of feel like they're too old for this, or they're starting to lose their understanding of what this stuff is. I made a bit of a pledge or vow to myself that I was going to do my best to stay in that game and to stay passionate and curious. And I would say on the journey, which, now you're looking at 30 years of doing this, a little bit more, I'm lucky in that it does satiate me still, meaning I don't come to work thinking I'm just going through the motions. I'm not really curious, or this AI thing will pass. And so it's not really germane to the work that I have to do. I don't feel that at all. And on the other side, I'm really excited by all of this new stuff and playing with it and getting my hands dirty and investing in it and then advising in it. And the secondary part of it for me is at least both the nose and hands in part of it, which I think people lose over time. Meaning my nose is in it. I want to think strategically and be able to think and read and follow and listen and be a part of that and to have notes around it and thoughts. The hands in is doing something with it, whether that's investing, whether that's getting on stage and doing a keynote, whether that's applying it to what we're trying to build at Thinkers One, whether it's for a podcast, a LinkedIn post, whatever it might be. It's that output that I also think keeps me in that place of, where fear and uncertainty can somewhat become a superpower a little bit.
Why do you think you have that fear and uncertainty without it sounds like at the very high level, like you had probably a good quote unquote childhood, but like you still had these things. Like what do you think led you to have this fear and uncertainty or insecurity?
Yeah, it came in a different way for me. I remember I grew up in a lower middle class family and still was in quite an affluent community. And in that affluent community, you would be invited for sleepovers and friends' places. And, most young people don't notice what their friends' parents' homes look like or businesses are or what cars they have. You kind of just are there to hang out and be friends. And I don't know why it was always in my brain of looking around and thinking like, wow, like how do you get all this stuff? This is, in a world where you have nothing or very little and people have so much, you're like, what's the gap between what's happening in my family and what's happening here? And the net of that I took out at I remember being really young and thinking this is essentially they're not that much smarter than myself or my parents. They're just doing something different. They've chosen a different path. And that to me was very illuminating because as I got older and started interacting more and more with what I would define as successful people, I believe a lot of my peers would have stopped and said, they're much smarter than me. They're much more experienced. They're much more this. And my answer back was always the same, which is they might have more experience and they might have more tread on the tires. There's no doubt about that. But they're not that much smart. There's not like a massive, some people are. There are some people that are super brilliant. You meet them and you're like, what level are these people on? But the vast majority of people are simply pursuing, thinking, strategizing, building. They are somewhat structured, right? And those are the things that I took from a very young age. And, look, it might have been from somewhat of a materialistic initiation, which is normal. You're young, you want the things you want. But as I got older, I realized that it was less about the materialism and more about time, right? Time is the only resource we have. It's unrenewable. It's time. And in my brain, it was, well, if everyone's going to put in these 7, 8, 9, 10, 12 hours a day, one is it better be something that's stimulating to me, and it better be something that has some type of longevity. And so when I talk about what I do, my site says I decode the future. I mean, it's marketing talk. Right. But I am very deeply embedded in this idea that there are many tools and technologies that are already prevailing through our system that businesses don't use to capture bigger brand, better storytelling, better outcomes in business. And that as a platform is a very long and wide highway. The future never comes. The future. Right. And so when I look at some of those things, and I'll let the people watching or listening to this parse out what those are, that created a place that gives me that runway at scale.
I love that. And then why do you think, though, you were different than a lot of your peers? So to your point that you asked, like you sort of made like, hey, like you have this insecurity. Okay, I get that point, like why you're different. You saw everyone else, they had more things like that. What then led you to keep asking those questions? Or even just think about entrepreneurs, right? So many people try to become an entrepreneur and fail or stall out. What kept you going? And because look, you weren't necessarily an overnight success. Maybe you were, but then also to your point, like, look, there are some people who are just wildly smarter than everyone else. But that's actually, once again, I totally agree. It's very rare where you have someone like that. It's actually either once a combination of luck, other things, or in many cases, just sticking with it for a long time. But once again, what kept you in it and differentiated you from everyone else outside of that fear and insecurity? Because lots of founders have that, but then they just don't maybe stick with it.
Maybe it's just my enjoyment of science fiction or thinking about what's next, but I would look at everything from the lens of this could be so much better. I remember getting an Atari 2600 baseline video game and thinking, imagine a world where the characters look almost real, or you couldn't tell the difference. I didn't know what that meant. I was very young at the time. But that idea, when I got my first modem and I connected in through a local BBS through the local college, and I was still in high school, imagine what that means for the telephone or the mail system. When the first web browser came in and I would open up a website, walk away for hours and come back and it still wasn't fully loaded, thinking, imagine when we had faster connections or what that does to publishing. So all of those things in my life from a very young age were very present in terms of this idea of, I think this can be done differently or better or more uniquely would be one. The secondary aspect of that, from my perspective, came early on and then much later. And it's under this, I call it the allowance model. The later model, which I think is better than telling the early model of this, was I was exposed to, I don't know if you're familiar with the strategic coach, Dan Sullivan, and his work, which is excellent. Through a friend of mine who was very involved in his program. I couldn't afford to be a part of that program. I didn't have a business the size and scale of which they would have taken me in. And through that individual, from Barry, we went through this program called the Goal Cultivator. And there was just a basic ideology that Dan Sullivan brings forward that you'll see in other entrepreneurial books. It wasn't that breakthrough, but it just landed at the right moment, at the right time with me. It was this idea that when you're an entrepreneur, you are somewhat out of the allowance model. When you're a kid, I'll do my chores and my parents pay me. How is that different than work? I go to work, I do my chores at work, and my boss pays me. Dan really opened my eyes, which I already knew and had done, to this idea that when you're an entrepreneur, you are really taking on the economic burden and opportunity of what your full potential could and might be. That you are essentially removing the entire allowance model. Pay me for this because I'm worth that, versus I'm going to create, back to creating the value. Those two ideas together are the things that drive me all the time. Look, there are some days where it's not working out. I'm thinking, should I go get a job? And I'm like, what am I doing? If I just work harder or shift the way I'm working or shift how I'm doing it, I can just continue on this path.
And so essentially the idea being that as an entrepreneur, you're owning the outcomes for yourself. And so therefore, because you're responsible for those things, it frees you in many ways. Of course, that freedom can be pretty scary to a lot of people. Weirdly, conversely, like I think a lot of people say, I want to be free. 100%. You don't want to be free.
I mean, this is the great unlock when anybody has any form of entrepreneurial success. It's a world in which we're told that's very, very risky. Don't do that. Like, what will happen to you? And you realize that it is some form of social control. And we need a lot of people who just want to be, I call them, I don't call them, but I call them the model numb and dumb. Everybody will watch YouTube and TikTok. You want to be the person who creates YouTube and TikTok. Like that's the gap between the two. It's not that, and I say numb and dumb in the sense of all of these are functions of keeping your time away from the self-actualization of what the potential might actually be. And when you unlock that, it's sounding somewhat metaphysical, but I believe it, that when you unlock that, you realize, to quote Seth Godin's well-known aphorism, the safest thing you can do is be risky, and the riskiest thing you can do is be safe.
Mm-hmm. Yep. A quote that I have, which I don't quite attribute to myself, but close enough, is the greatest risk is not taking one. And essentially, of course, like it means like if you don't take that risk, it's riskier not to.
But
right?
The world threatens it, right? Like I was thinking so much about this the other day. I happen to have had a very fortuitous life where I've been introduced to very interesting people at very unique times. One of them being Harley Finkelstein, who is the president of Shopify. And I met him just as he was actually selling t-shirts online and using Shopify as he became their first customer. And we maintained, our communications and friendship reaction.
Did you invest as well? Did you get...
No, like in fact, again, when we can talk about regrets in another episode. One of them would be that I was head down building my agency. And while I was doing some minor investing, I just wasn't in the headspace of what I would have done. And the opportunities he laid in front of me, in fairness to me, were stupid for me not to take. But I was building my own business at a different type of clientele and different type of business. But the idea with that conversation and seeing Harley and how he thinks about the world and how he pushes these ideas forward, you go to this place where you realize, hold on, it is true what he's saying. That essentially it's never been easier to start a business, right? The cost of starting a business, from becoming an LLC to registering to getting a domain to building even a website or a mobile platform, especially now with generative AI, like never easier. And yet, and this is the part that what you were saying rang so true to me. It's not like we have a lower percentage of entrepreneurs that succeed. That's really interesting. If 95% of businesses, whatever the data is in your geographic area, is still failure, in a world where it's less and less expensive, in fact, it's literally like stepping over a rope than it is jumping a hurdle to start a business, what's happening there? And then obviously the answer is very obvious. It's the human factor. It's the human component of it that makes it really hard. And so you start realizing that even if we make the accessibility of starting or being an entrepreneur or making entrepreneurship accessible to so many people, I want to start seeing the number of success increase. I'd love to see that number drop to 80% to 40% of failure rates.
But do you think so? So then, just to define it really clearly, is failure because of it? Is there a human element because people are either too scared to start or they don't stick with it long enough? Like, what is the reason why people fail, right? And you use podcasting or TikToking, like you and I are creating this stuff. You're 20 years ahead of me of doing this. And yet I'm already in the top 1% or probably even top 0.01% of podcasters, because something like 99% of podcasts don't get past the first 10 episodes.
So the answer is 50% that, I think. My stats are going to be terrible here. And the other 50% is simply another line that I use constantly, which is the market is brutal. So the answer might be in this case that your content, the way you tell stories and present yourself, may be more compelling than even me. And that builds the audience because the market is brutal and decides. Much in the same way that you can have all of these tools, from Shopify to Squarespace to TikTok to ChatGPT, to do all of these things to help you build a strategic business, but the market is brutal and your product or service just doesn't resonate at the time of the marketplace. How many people do you know? Like, I mean, I've been in the tech space for a long time. I could look to thousands of businesses that have completely failed, that were run by great people with a great product and great service, and the timing was simply off. And by the way, we could go back to Shopify and ask ourselves, if Shopify were to have started 5 to 10 years earlier, would it be Shopify? Now, the answer might be maybe, because Toby and Harley and the team are amazing. But the answer could also be that at that point, cloud computing wasn't really there. And the ability to actually scale it and build it as some type of SaaS model versus install softwares with value-added resellers coming in to update you that your Salesforce is a different version than my Salesforce and how much you could afford to pay, versus the cloud-based world that they entered into that allowed them to scale this at such a delta while the others were stuck on their legacy system. So, and I'm being very pedantic about that. That's not the full situation that brought Shopify to be Shopify, but the timing and the market being brutal is another huge factor here.
But there are a lot of, I think one thing that I find throughout the show, a lot of people miss out on is this is not a course correct term, you're probably bothered by it, but like stick-to-itiveness that is implied in being successful in business. In other words, like sticking with it for a while. So that Shopify example, maybe they started 5 years too early, but if they stuck with it and kept compounding and improving every day, at some point, the market probably would turn around and they would have been perfectly positioned. And then suddenly someone says, oh my God, you're this overnight success. And like, no. It's been like 5 years of nothing. And I think actually Figma was an example of this, where they were literally around for forever and nothing.
I was thinking about Netflix. Netflix is the perfect example of that. But are you capitalized enough and have investors or are self-financing enough that you can wait it out? And that's a big question mark where you can be iterating, shifting business models, trying to figure out, because by the way, streaming was not the Netflix model as it started. It became that, but the market wasn't there for it. They had to do things like put them in the physical mail and send them to people and scale it a different way, create the membership model, which was another. You could read your own Netflix story and see how many iterations they had to go through while they were ultimately waiting out a world where broadband was as easily accessible and of higher quality than even cable connections, which again was a coin flip in terms of the ability to do that. So that's the hard parts are all the hard parts. Having the intestinal fortitude as an individual and the skills and ability to surround yourself with the people to make it happen, one big component of it. The market's brutality is, what's a simpler way to say the markets are brutal is luck. A lot of it is luck and really good timing. I mean, I look to our digital agency. We started in 2000. Could you have better timing? Post web boom, suddenly we have connectivity. Suddenly there's a commercialization. You're starting to see Amazon do what Amazon does. And just everything's in the place where everybody's realizing, that went from tell me why I need a website to, whoa, we're really behind on digital. And social's coming in. We don't understand how to communicate. That's very fortuitous. When we sold the business and we were approached, we were trying to scale the business. And then we were told, hey, why don't you try to sell it? We're doing well. Why would we try to sell it? Because the market's here and this and that. Okay, let's try. And then it turns out, within a year, that market somewhat evaporated as well. The idea of being digital versus non-digital kind of went away in the digital marketing space. So a lot of that is just luck and timing. And it is true that in order to get that to work for you, you have to be prepared. There's no doubt.
So you, just to harp on this a little bit, nitpick a little bit, how do we really define kind of failure in the people that are the successes in the end, right? I mean, you and I have seen probably hundreds, if not thousands of people who I've been in Silicon Valley for 15 years. And there are so many people I know who've been here and left, right? They started business, they left. I don't know what they're doing anymore, right? And I'm sure the same for you. What has kept certain people, why do some people still succeed when others don't? What is that failure mode? And then how do people listen? How do you avoid that? What is the unlock to say, I can create that luck or be in the position to have that luck find me?
I'm going to invert the question a little bit. And I'll make a grander argument, which we can then maybe debate, which is I think success is the anomaly. That's why.
It is the anomaly, right? What, 1 to 5% of people succeed. However, it's also the anomaly you want to define success.
And then we start doing case studies and white papers, and then we start having debates about, no, Netflix was so prescient and brilliant. And not saying they weren't, I'm not going to sit here, but it's the anomaly. There were tons of other streaming services and video things happening at that time. And just crickets, digital crickets, virtual tumbleweeds. It just didn't work out. So the question becomes, is it the individual? Is it their vision? Or is it just simply the market wasn't there at that point? Was it just a brand story? I mean, how often do you ultimately believe that the brands that you love are the best manufactured products or services in the world? Probably not. They tell a better story. That story resonates with a greater audience. And because of that, they're able to access a greater market. They have a bigger TAM. And so part of what I think is missing in this is a bit of the humility of understanding that. And what that means is, in a world where we have a much broader definition of what your network is, your network used to be the people you know and your customers and your suppliers. Now it's agents of AI. Now it's new media. It's a whole bunch of things that build your network. And your ability to use those tools and access those tools creates another unique, I think, aspect of entrepreneurship, which is a lot of us are still focused on the attention economy, with the TAM being like, I need to tell everybody about my product and service, where what we really see is the ones that are more niche focused and dig in, you can build, the TAM is much bigger than you think. That total addressable market is much bigger than you think because of the globalization and connectivity that we now, most of us get to enjoy and be a part of. So those new metrics, I believe, create a different definition of that and allow you to play in ways where you don't have to be the biggest or the best. You just have to know how to access that specific TAM, and you can scale out of that. And by the way, like even if you look at a lot of business books recently, a lot of them are talk and spend time looking at brands that are trying to enter new markets and how they fail.
Yep.
And I always think to myself, what was the play? Was that play just somewhat traditional rhetoric, or was that really precision driven by the fact that we've done really well or maximized this total addressable market? What's the next one?
How do you, so it's sort of a good segue. I mean, I have so many different questions, but this is a good segue into talking a little bit about like marketing, brand building, storytelling in general today. And what does that look like? So maybe just to be specific, think about a company or a brand. How do they decide when they go into a different market or go in a different direction and expand past it, right? I even use my own company as an example. You talked about chores. Our name is Chore. So for us, like we work mostly with tech startups today. But there's so many, I mean, I think every company needs essentially a fractional chief of staff to run your entire back office. Yet I don't want our chief company to get distracted. And yet I also know there's this massive other markets, but I also know we've not come anywhere close to saturating our core market today in the slightest amount. How do I decide when to make a move there, to decide, but maybe our market is good, but maybe it's not great. Maybe we have to go in a different direction. How does a company think through all of that? I mean, obviously how it relates to brand building in the first place and telling your story.
It's a challenge I deal every day with, whether it's Thinkers One or thinking about where my time is best spent as a keynote speaker. It's the normal aspect of human nature of more, bigger, greater, especially when you have those entrepreneurial drives. Focus still has been, from my perspective, the most powerful skill that I have. Really being able, I'll give you a very pedantic example of this, but it's so true. I've been speaking professionally for close to 20 years, and it's very unique. I'm very unique in that sense because I've had agency representation from day one. So I am exclusive, as weird as this sounds, with two speaking bureaus, one where I'm based in Canada and one in the US. And so what happens is you essentially get emails that say, hey, are you available on October the 31st to speak in Los Angeles? And I look at my calendar and I go, yay or nay. And then you fly down. It's like I did last week. I was actually in LA at LA Live at the JW Marriott Hotel for an event. And as I'm walking the halls, you look over and notice there's probably 4 or 5 other events happening literally in that hotel, forgetting the fact that it's literally attached to the Los Angeles Convention Center. It's right there. Okay? Right. How many events are happening in Las Vegas on that day, in Chicago, in Boston, in New York City, in Florida, in Fort Lauderdale, in Florida, in Boca Raton? So like you could go through that and say thousands, if not thousands. And I'm only speaking at one that week in LA. How big is that? Like, and I've been doing this for 20 years where you would think that at this point, everyone's heard me speak and that's it. Clearly not. Like so the focus of being able to look at that, laugh and say, if the speaker in that room drops dead and they happen to run and go, does anyone here know how to give a keynote? It's like, here we go. Let's plug me in. Let me go do what I do. I'm great at this. So that those moments of humility are very important because you can get in your brain to this point where you believe there's nowhere else. There's nothing. I have to start opening. And the truth is being self-reflective to the reality of the situation is very humbling.
And so obviously that humbling aspect is great. And then, but you also talk about, this growth part. And so your focus, right? So you're being focused. Where does that focus lead you to want to continue, let's say, to be a speaker or to get higher fees or like whatever the next big milestone is, be the keynote of keynote speakers at the biggest conference in Vegas or something?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I don't know that there's one answer. And this is the problem of every industry, but we'll stay on this industry because it's one I know and it's one people can probably relate to. There are people who get significantly more and greater fees than I do. How do they do that? They have a bigger selling book. They have something that was a lightning rod in the past couple of moments. They've sold a bigger business. The business that they were part of is a bigger brand than, what I've created. And so there's always that aspect to it, the one side of it. The other side of it is my stuff tired? Is my stuff in the zeitgeist? Is it part of the culture? Now, again, luckily, based off of the topics I choose and my areas of interest, they're always not only part of it, but usually a little bit ahead, right? So what I'm talking about is usually here and coming.
Mm-hmm.
I like staying in that lane. And again, this is the self-awareness of really understanding the one side of it. But the question over here, like, well, does that mean I should spend more time promoting Thinking with Mitch Joel, my podcast? Does that mean I should write another book? I haven't written a book since 2013. Does that mean I should scream louder on LinkedIn or do? The answer is, maybe partially, I don't know. But the exhaust valve on that, and it speaks directly to the question you were asking about, like, what do I do with this brand at this point with this business, is I see it in a more media-driven way where, look, we're in a world where any one of us, me, you, anybody watching or listening to this, can have an idea and publish that idea in text, audio, images, video, live to the world, broadcasted, recorded like this is. We could do long form like this. We could do short form, quick little posts on X. Anybody can do that and essentially distribute it at scale for free still. I mean, I make the argument that it costs a lot more in this more sophisticated day and age of digital media, but it is true that you could post something that could go quote unquote viral and essentially change the game. That is still a possibility. It's plausible we see this happen. And if you're not thinking like that, that to me is more problematic than what I should be doing.
So then how does it lead to, going back to your point of like focus, what are the areas of focus that are critical then to enable you to keep doing that? And for your own business, how do you decide, maybe is it the in-person conversations? Is it a podcast recording? Is it a new post, right? Because I think about this myself, right? I live in San Francisco. I go to a decent amount of events, but I actually don't like going to events all that much anymore because I don't know who I'm going to meet or why I'm going to meet them. I basically only go if I'm speaking. But even then, I'm not sure. I'm like, this podcast will reach more people in a targeted way, and it'll provide value to the overall ecosystem, which at some point might come back towards me as an individual or toward my company. But in the end, overall value. And so I may be more on the digital side, but like, how do I decide where to spend that time? Because as your point is like, you only have so much time. So how do you focus on the right things?
There are metrics, but I think I'm more philosophical than OKR driven. And the philosophical question I would throw back at you, Adam, is what can you not stop doing? So I'll tell you, like, from me, you explained my history. I love writing articles. Always have. And I do it really quick. Back before there was an internet, I was writing for the Alternative Weekly Music Magazine up here. And you could call me on a Thursday and tell me you need 3 record reviews for the next day. And I could bang those out. It's just what I did. I was trained in that for decades. And my ability to just hop on a phone with any artist without much preparation time and get something good out of them, it's a skill I learned, I nurtured. I got very interested in being interviewed. So I was being interviewed myself on radio, on TV, which gives me the ability to be pretty good at it now. So all of those skill sets were things that were interesting to me. But if you said to me, what is that stuff? Like, I can't imagine. You could take away my entire audience and everything I have, and I'd still probably wake up and write an article and publish it somewhere. I would still love if I was given access to speak to people like you and others and spend an hour with them doing what you're doing, which is picking my brain or picking your brain.
Yeah.
I love reading. So I'll read the books, and then back in the old days, I would write a letter to the author. Now you would send, we sent emails to in the early days of email for sure. And then the head fake is I ask them if they want to spend 45 minutes to an hour talking to me about it, and that I'll publish it on my podcast. And now that it's got audience, I have more access to people like that. I'm essentially in a world where I am doing the things that I don't want to stop doing and the things that I think are making me better. Smarter, more in touch, access to doing those things. And also, as we get older, I think I'm probably much older than you are, but as I get older, at least, I'm thinking about things that you were kind of experimenting with, which is I don't need to go out at night. I don't drink. I don't smoke. I don't do any of that stuff. I was in the music business for a long time. I didn't like it when bands went on late. I'm all for Coldplay matinees at 4 p.m. I'd pay a premium for a ticket to that concert for sure. So in all that, it's kind of like when you have kids and most kids have some type of accessibility stuff at school. They all get certain accommodations. The joke is when you speak to the school, they'll say every kid has some type of accommodation. And my thought was, well, that's interesting. What happens after school? Like, you don't get accommodations at work. You don't get an hour more in a quiet space to do your project. And the answer that you hear is they learn how to do how they do, and then they self-select. They choose work and environments that are more suited to their learning capabilities. That's exactly what all of us are doing right now. I mean, all of us are doing that. So I never fault someone for not being an entrepreneur. It's just not the type of work that is good for them potentially. And I'm not saying this work is good for everybody. I don't think it is.
No, I mean, it's very scary work in many cases, and you don't necessarily know where your next paycheck's going to come from, and there's no guarantees. On the other hand, you have a lot of freedom, and you get to choose where you're going to go with things. So going back to the focus point for a second, and actually maybe a weird question, we'll see where it goes, but your Coldplay concert mention was interesting to me, right? I wanted to make a joke, but the joke was essentially like, okay, you go to a Coldplay concert in with your other lover who's ultra ahead of HR. But no, but I mean, the way I'm going to make it into a question for you is that CEO, I forget his name and it doesn't really matter, right? He was obviously very focused, was quote unquote successful in his industry, was CEO of a big company, all these other things. Did he lose his focus? Like, how do people get tripped up, right? He's a very public example where he did all the things you're not supposed to do. You start dating stereotypically your head of HR, who would of course tell anyone else, don't date internally in the company, dating her, go to a concert, and then somehow like, it's just like all these things are obvious. Did he lose focus? Where did he go wrong and fail in his own personal entrepreneurial success journey?
Yeah, I don't know. And I say I don't know in the sense of, do we really know the whole story and what the situation relationship?
Clearly, if he got caught, was going to obviously would trip up his career path.
Yeah,
He didn't have to train his career path for a long time now.
I mean, I don't know. The truth is I can close my eyes and somewhat visualize the person, but I'm pretty sure they could walk by me on the street down the stairs and I wouldn't know who they were. And I do not know your name.
You would hire him for your business, then you would do a little bit more.
Yeah, it might pop up on Google there for sure. I don't understand situations like that because I am not built like that at all. I've just never had the cheating thing. I've never had the doing my own thing. I'm always I think it's maybe because I have that journalism background in me, that everything you say can and will be used against you in the court of public opinion, that everything is probably being recorded, that integrity is the stuff you do when no one's looking. Like I was just either brought up that way and also developed that way, where whenever that happens, I'm always like, didn't you walk into a venue with big signs on the door saying you are being recorded? Like so I don't know where these lapses come. I don't know if, some psychologist would probably analyze this and say that he was looking to get caught, or who knows in those scenarios. And look, I'm just happy that professionally in my life, I've never even had to think or deal with that because I never, like even the whole DEI thing and that whole movement. I was writing for an alternative newspaper that was the first newspaper that ever had a LGBTQ, back then we called it queer column. It was the first one ever. These were friends of mine. I remember at one point I was working for a small PR firm and I went to a cocktail, like a lunch and learn or something like that. And someone came up to me and said, "Oh, you work at so-and-so?" I said, "Yeah." And they're like, "What's it like to have a woman boss?" And I was like totally taken aback. And this is years ago. And it's just like, I don't know, like that's just all that stuff, like who people sleep with, what they do. I'm like, I just assume everyone's like me, as like honest and good and clear. And so whenever I hear these stories or see them, I'm like, I don't even know how to get into that person's mind because it doesn't even make sense to me.
Fair enough. Okay. So going back to like the storytelling part and building your brand, all those pieces, like what are the levers for success for either an individual entrepreneur or for their businesses that they're running? Like, how should they be thinking about that in once again, like maybe other markets as well, but just generally to start with?
Consistency is the real answer because ultimately
the same message over and over again. Is that what you mean?
I think you need a narrative, and that narrative is going to change. So it's not going to be over and over again redundant. It's going to be a narrative that you're sticking to, that you are creating around, whether it's story-based, message-based, performance-based. And I say the word consistent because in a world of 10 years of 400 pieces of content every year, I'm lucky if one or two get some type of pop. But ultimately, when someone does the retroactive work of Googling that person, looking them up, seeing what they're about, there's a substantive enough portfolio that allows it to stand up for itself. And I don't think that that's any different from an individual to an actual brand. And the reason I say that is because it is really hard in this day and age to get that message through. I have this every day where I have a coffee with someone and I start talking about Thinkers One, my new startup, and they go, "Oh, I haven't heard about that." And I'm like, "But that's so weird. Like, you connected to me through LinkedIn, and that's all I talk about on LinkedIn."
I mean, this pet peeve of mine, by the way, when I have calls, people like, "Oh, so where do you live? What do you do exactly?" Like literally a rule I have is I always look everyone up before I have a call with them on LinkedIn. It's the easiest thing.
But this is like part of the basics of like, how do you be successful? And Jeffrey Gitomer wrote the Sales Bible, Little Red Book of Sale, and I love him, love his work before I got to know him and connect with him. And he says, your network is your net worth. And I just live and breathe that. I tell it to my kids, anybody who I hear, any moment I get a chance like this, I go, your network is your net worth. And again, the definition of your network isn't just individuals you're connected to. It's the brand, it's new media, it's AI agents, it's all of those things create the network. And I do believe that is true. And so I'm the same way. But most people aren't. Like, can you imagine going for coffee with someone and they didn't spend 5 seconds just skimming your LinkedIn profile? And so what are you up to these days?
I don't get it. I'm like, how are you going to be successful if you haven't done that prep work already?
Now, again, think about it. There's two ways to look at this, which is super interesting. One side is you're asking to meet someone for coffee. Imagine not doing that. Like, that's the inverse, right? Because the reality is the other, which is someone asks you and you're being kind to give your time and you still make the effort to go and look at, well, who are they? What are they about? So I live in this world where I'm constantly perplexed by people who don't do what I consider, it's almost like please and thank you. That type of thing where it's like, are we in a world where we don't do that in business anymore? Like, it's beyond me, but we are. Like, it is those simple things sometimes that make a delta of a difference. And by the way, in storytelling, that's why I say consistency. The vast majority of people and brands and companies cannot be consistent. They'll try, like TikTok is so popular, and they'll try, go and look. Like, you can look and see when they started and when they dropped. And I'm not saying they shouldn't have dropped. Maybe there was no reactions and they realized they got to, cut and try something. That's fine too. But over time, once you're dedicated at least to something in that form, you start seeing where the stories in the audience is. And if you don't over time, then yeah, I get it. You want to shift, you want to zig, you want to zag. All of that is true. But wow, I don't think as a business, as a brand, that we've ever lived in a time with this much type of things you can do to tell your story. We just haven't.
And do you think is there a time frame for when someone should actually consider being inconsistent essentially and trying something different? Like, how do you know you're telling the right message in the first place and stay consistent with that same message versus changing the message and go with something else? Like, it takes consistency, almost implies doing it for a certain period of time.
Well, you're forgetting that in between change and doing what you're doing, there's a word called nuance. And you're going to live in the nuance. Those that don't are typically the ones that fail. It's like, look, I decided this is my message. I don't care what the audience says. I'm going with it. That's not what happens. You do a podcast, you interview 4 or 5 guests, and on one of those guests, you get 3 messages and you go, oh, the audience is telling you which direction to go in. I need more guests or topics that are similar to that. And then I can use those emails, those people, those interactions as interested people. It goes back to Kevin Kelly's 100 fans that everyone talks about. It's so true that I have people now where I get Facebook messages and LinkedIn messages when there's typos in my articles. And they're like, hey, I'm really sorry. I'm like, no, don't be sorry. Like, I love you. Thank you. Because it means you read it. You captured something. You're helping me. Like, we are now BFFs. We are elbowing, we are going to walk together like the Wizard of Oz down the yellow brick road. You're coming along. You're on the journey. So the problem I hear is, or I see typically, is there's a strategy and some deployment, and then they worry about change being like some 180. Where I'm like, no, there's a lot of nuance in between. This is our message, and now we have to change 180. I don't think that that's always true. And a lot of times what you see when something's really successful or starts getting a bit of the momentum or flywheel effect is it's playing in those nuances. It's slowly picking up on what they're hearing from the market versus this big drastic change. But going back to what we said earlier, it happens to be usually a bigger problem when brands make that change and they're not really a part of that market. And that's where you see that collapse and the erosion. But a lot of times the nuance makes perfect sense. Even if you wanted to talk about Labubos, which everyone wants to talk about, suddenly they start working, Pop Mark starts working with a Disney or starts licensing. And you're like, oh, Like that's really different, but I get it. The power of Star Wars and Labubu is a plus, it's a plus multiplier.
Yep.
Versus, we're Labubu and now we're in the business of making puffer jackets. It's like,
right. They're still playing in, basically what you're saying is they're still playing in their market. And
by
so
expanding
for them, and it's expanding it, but it's still within I almost think of it as like a wave, right? Some days there's waves that are really high. Some days there's waves that are essentially very low, but it's still a general wave hitting the shore. Yes. It's kind of the same thing. And it just depends on the frequency. And so you can change within that, but you can't change the nature of, I'm pushing it, maybe the nature of an ocean in a sense.
Yeah, but the nuance is so interesting. So if you think about, like, for those who don't know Labubu, it's essentially a blind box stuffy. You get a blind box, you choose it. There's different series.
Right, so my kids, by the way, don't know where they are right now.
But the idea, like, you could do multiple series. Okay, that's interesting. You could do a mystery one even. Okay, that's interesting. It's collectible. So now you're playing in a different space. I could make it smaller. I could make it much bigger. I can take away the surprise and create a premium. I could license it to get, like, you can start slicing it where the nuance becomes these unfettered, beautiful sized markets that are very dynamic and different and established, versus that idea of making this massive, crazy leap because we think it's wrong or off.
Yeah. Okay, so that makes a ton of sense for founders. And then is there any way, like using Labubu as sort of an example maybe to start with, like how do you know you've hit on the right thing to keep focusing on? In other words, like how do you know in that very early day where like, okay, I generally have the right angle. Maybe it's not the perfect message, but it's in the right general space that like something is working. I mean, is it just to your point of like economic value? You've started creating some economic value, so let's just keep hitting it.
I think economic is, like, my initial gut answer was money. People are willing to pay you for your product or service. And then I was reflecting more on something Avinash Kaushik used to always say. Avinash was the analytics evangelist at Google. He's written some great books. He's still a fantastic writer now. He's in the agency side. But he used to say a customer is someone who's bought from you more than once. Perhaps as I'm getting older, I start recognizing what that really means. Getting inside of like loyalty programs and loyalty points and all that chaos. But this idea that if someone has not just bought from you, but then bought from you again. And then obviously you look at things like we have all the scoring systems around how likely is it that they would refer you to someone else. Like you have all of these types of scores and systems. I think those are all interesting and valuable. But it's this idea of really nurturing a real customer, this person who's keeps showing up and wants more from you. And why is that? Who are they? What space do they occupy? Is that who we thought the customer was? What other products are they needing? How does that evolve? Those conversations are so powerful. And again, I took it for granted. I have to admit, being an agency person, you would sit down with clients every day, B2B, B2C, small, medium, large, national, multinational, and they would just tell you the problems. And you would come to them with solutions. I mean, this was the business of what we did forever. And when you're out of that business, you forget that that's all it was. You were listening. And so in the case of being the entrepreneur, now you have to kind of do that for yourself a little bit. You're almost coaching yourself a little bit. Yeah. What is the market telling me? Where is the product? Where is the service? What are the ways I could tell this story? What isn't clicking with the people who we think the customers are? Those are all excessively fertile grounds for any entrepreneur to play in a lot.
Yeah, although difficult, easier said than done, right? Difficult to actually.
Everything's hard. Yeah, nothing is easy. Like there's nothing. I have not walked into any room and thought, and I've worked with some really fun brands over the years and thought, they have it so easy. Like, no one has it easy. No one, you are waking up to figure out how to make this work. I was at an event the other week and the founder of the company said, I find it strange that the more disciplined I am, the more money I make. I thought that's exactly correct.
No, exactly. Right. The more distractions you have, the more likely you are to trip up and fail and lose your focus. How do folks get great at storytelling? Right. Something you talk about it.
Yeah. I'll give you a tangential story to this and bring me back if I go too far off on the horizon here. When I speak, it is not uncommon that someone comes up to me who's either part of the team that hired me or someone in the audience, and they say something like, that was really great. I should do that. And for years, my reaction was, you wouldn't say that to a brain surgeon. You wouldn't, like, after brain surgery, go, that was really cool. Like, I should do that, right? And again, age, maturity, experience. When someone says that to me now, my real reaction is, I must be really good if I make it look that easy.
Yeah, that's a great way. That's a great flip of the perspective.
That's storytelling.
Yeah.
Nobody is good at telling stories out of the box. It is a very difficult, nuanced, and hard thing to do. We take it completely for granted. We take the skill for granted. You and I are doing this. You haven't even acknowledged one of my great skills, Adam, and I'm supremely disappointed in you, which is
I failed you. I'm so sorry.
yeah. I don't have many vocal tics. I don't go, I don't go, I don't go, I don't go, like, I don't do any of that stuff. The reason is I spent 15 years recording interviews with rock stars in very precarious situations that were very loud and noisy. And I would have to go home with a little tape recorder and transcribe that. And when you spend hours hearing yourself go, like, kinda, it is the most annoying thing in the world. And so I proactively trained myself in my brain to try not to. We're humans. We all do this stuff. It's normal, but at scale to not do it. What does that mean tangentially in this moment? It means that my ability to stand up and cogently communicate an idea to an audience is much stronger than almost anyone else. But it's not something that you would say, I'll pay a delta for, right? It's just not.
Yeah.
But cumulatively, all of those things coming together, years and years of thinking, what's the angle? What's the story? How does this work? Is this better in text? Should I take the video from this? Should I just use audio? Is audio the best? Because of my profession and the work that I do, it becomes just a part of my DNA.
Yep.
And so if I were to say to you, it's that, like, that's what's going to help you become a great storyteller, the answer would be, who's got the time? You don't. Thankfully, there are people like me, who I don't do this work, but who do this work, who have done the same thing I've done, and their job as experts in storytelling, in creating connections, are available to you for a price, for a fee, whatever it might be. And so the story is, you wouldn't say to somebody, I really love doing all this digital stuff. I should learn how to build an app. You would say, I have an idea for an app. I need someone who can help me develop this. I think telling great stories is the same way. It's very hard to tell great stories. And we dismiss it as a value proposition as if anybody can do it. No, some people are really good at finance. Some people are really good at strategy. Some people are really good at brand. Some people are really good at, like, I could go on and on. I don't have the skills that other salespeople have. They spent more time and energy doing that. I need to hire people like that.
Yep.
And so when it comes to stories, what I would say is, sure, you might have it in you. You might have watched a bunch of great movies and know how to great story, how to spin a great piece of yarn. That's possible. But it's also possible that that should not be your focus, that you should bring in the people who are great at it, who believe in what you're trying to do, and can really transpose that to make the result what you need it to be.
So sure, I can buy that, but as an entrepreneur, do you have the flexibility to actually like outsource the storytelling part?
I don't know if you do. I can tell you where I came from. I had 3 business partners in my digital agency. We were together for almost 2 decades. We had a nice exit to a large public company. And part of the greatest part of that story is the fact that the 4 of us are still best friends and love each other in a world where anybody who has done that, there have been lawsuits, they've broken up, somebody left, they don't talk to anybody, they don't like the person, that person screwed more. And the reason I believe is because as 4 individuals, we believed in the collective. We can outvote each other. But we, more importantly, didn't really like the work the other person did. It wasn't the other guy like
the 3 skills, essentially.
So if you're saying to me as an entrepreneur, I can't afford it, okay, but you are in a place where you could give some percentage of this to somebody who might love to do that and love the fact that you're going to do that other stuff.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, you can find someone else who can tell that story really well. I'm very biased towards actually someday want to write a book about storytelling. I don't know if I'll ever get there.
And by the way, it goes back to success. It goes back to the anomaly of success. The stories that we tell are the ones that are successful.
Correct. Well said. Yes.
Most books don't work, right? Like, how many books work?
Very few.
Right.
But the idea of being good at storytelling as a founder and entrepreneur, I think is important because you have to tell that story to yourself. You have to tell that story to people who will come work for you. You have to tell a story to your customers. And you have to be good at doing that and convincing people to buy this thing that is unknown, right? When you're starting a business as an entrepreneur, it has nothing like that has existed before.
But you also have to know that each of those stories are different types of stories that are different types of skills to communicate. What I was trying to use in my analogy of speaking is it's easy to see something great and think I can do it too. It's more intelligent to look at something great and go, wow, they're really good at it and they make it look so easy. It's worth X amount. We don't do that. We devalue the things that look easy. This is by the way, you know these stories of the FedEx logo, the Nike logo. Someone drew it on a napkin. Well, how much time did it take? Does it matter? Like this is iconic. I gave you something iconic. What's it worth? And that discussion and friction and debate is exactly boiled in and baked into the story you're asking, which is, should everybody be able to tell a great story? Of course they should. Is that everybody's core competency? No. Is the skill of telling a story easy and intuitive? Absolutely not. And so let's just at least step back and respect it, that it might be a skill that the best entrepreneurs have to nurture at scale.
So you're right. It might be for the best, but you also have to be really right. You can find people to do that. So this actually leads to another question. When do you know, or how do you know that you should or could delegate something to someone else and hand it off to someone who is better than you, right? So that is a question, and I'll use some personal examples that bother. Like, I'm a 4-time founder, invested in 200 plus companies. In a lot of the partners I've worked with or people I've seen work with together, it might be some engineering founder. And like they should say, well, I can handle sales. I can do this. This is easy. Or I can run operations, which is of course what my company does. This is easy, no problem. Yet they would never ask me to go figure out how to code the product. They wouldn't say, Adam, this is easy, go figure out how to code the product. Yet they think the work that I do is easy. And those companies have not been successful when you have founders and co-founders who are like that. But it happens over and over and over again where someone assumes that thing is easy because, I don't know, because sales seems easy. Coding is hard. Actually, sorry, coding is effing easy now with AI. We can go into that part. But like, how do you know when to delegate? To be very specific, how do you know when to delegate or find a partner who is complementary and you just trust them to do it?
When you self-acknowledge that there's no path forward if you either don't learn the skill and are able to excel at the skill, that's the moment where you are the barrier to the actual push forward. Those are always the moments. Now, whether you can afford it at that moment, whether you can afford the scale at that moment, those are very difficult questions. And sometimes it's a bit of, I'm going to have to MacGyver this. For those who are not old enough to know, I'm going to take this paper clip and this spoon and this elastic and jimmy rig something together that might make something work in the way I need it to. But those moments, and by the way, you can speak to every entrepreneur and they will tell you the ones that were able to have some type of velocity and speed around the scale, it's when they had the ability, whether that's physical, emotional, psychological, or just materially, to be able to both self-acknowledge and act on that. The problem becomes mostly from my perspective that people think they can do it all, or that they think it's easy or somewhat learnable. And I think a lot of things are very learnable, but there's a big difference between learnable and good. So the other story that you didn't tell is I have another podcast where I interview bass players. And I've been doing it for 10 years. It's every month. I used to play bass. I don't play bass anymore. I have these conversations all the time with people. And in the conversations with bass players, which are a very interesting breed of musician, it's always the same thing. They'll say to me something like, do you play bass? And my answer back is, I know how to play bass, but I'm not a bass player. So that is the exact gap that we're talking about. It's like this idea that you could figure out the 7 or 8 notes and know where to put your hands, but that doesn't mean I'm going to come off with anything that sounds like Mark King from Level 42. It's just not going to happen. And so if I need that type of attack, maybe I shouldn't be the person just because I know, or because I can just ride that E string and give you a good root note for a while, it can carry me to a certain point, but not much further beyond. Those moments are not definable by it's at this point, Adam, that happens. They're all very nuanced. But I do think ultimately it's your ability to self-recognize that moment and figure out what the alternative is.
So I love it. So self-recognize, identify the alternative. The key thing to me, at least, when it comes to defining or figuring out the alternative is the idea that you made, sort of, can you afford it? So that, though, is a question, right? To help me, we talk about things that I think will get you an answer that I know I would agree with, but let's see. Can you afford it? How do you know whether you can afford it? And to me, it's not, to be clear, it's not just about the cash. It's about your time. So how do you define it? How do you know whether you can or should afford it?
Generally, my reaction to the question is, can I afford not to? Usually that's the moment. Most of us can. When can you afford not to? And hard to know. Hard to know where you're at, why you're there, how you got there. A lot of times, again, let's be honest, a lot of stuff is going to fail. And so it's very hard because you're dealing with a situation where who wants to hear that or see that? But ultimately, the vast majority of us are going to fail. I mean, just the statistics are not good in our favor.
But then given that fact, isn't it sort of true that the speed at which you fail is actually an important factor? Like, it's a weird way to think of it, saying, I'd rather fail faster so I can try something new again than stick around for longer because I'm so cheap that I'm going to try to do it all myself.
That's definitely a formula. I've had this fight. I had this fight last week at an event in front of the event organizer who just disagreed with me, which is I am so tired of speed. I'm tired of it. I got my first computer in 1983. It was an Atari 800. And all I've heard since 1983, every single day of my life, is things are moving faster than ever. They're moving fast. Like, isn't it tiring to constantly be talking about how fast, and then delta that? Have you ever met a peer of yours who wants to hear that they should move faster and would take that as a positive thing? Do you know any employees that you work with where if you sat them down and said, look, you have to move faster, that would feel like, yeah, it's true, I'm not moving fast? So I believe, we need to just agree we're not going to talk about speed anymore. What we can talk about is two things that I think both replace it and that might help answer the question you're asking. One is direction. Don't tell me about speed. Talking about direction. Where are we going with this? And then what are the things we've done to build some kind of momentum? Because momentum is very different than speed. Momentum is the ability to do something that leads to something else that has some type of multiplying effect. And that the more you do it, as we know, once you start momentum, it's hard to stop momentum. I would much rather talk about the entrepreneur who's not saying, well, is now the time or not the time? It's more like, where are you going? What have you done to validate your moments of momentum? Can you actually validate that each step led to the momentum that created the delta where 2 + 2 = 6 or 5 or something more than 4? Those are conversations I'm willing to have and I'm interested in. And I believe that those are the types of formulas I would throw back to you to say that's what it is. If you're really clear on the direction and you have your moments of momentum, you will know or be able to at least feel when that actual moment is.
Are there things when you think through, going back to the afford piece, in that momentum element as well, like how does, just to break it down, is there a way to break down where I should sort of spend my time or money to create those moments of momentum?
Sales. Like none of this is all distractions. And
you don't need a product to get sales. You can still sell without a product.
We've seen that. I mean, what's Wall Street? Is Wall Street actual sales or is Wall Street potential?
Yeah, well said.
So, yeah. I mean, I don't say that in the sense of unethical. I don't say that at all. I mean it from an ethical standpoint that ultimately at the end of the day, the market is brutal. The market will tell you. And that if you are constantly on the phone speaking to the potentially right customer and there is nothing happening on the other side, you may have to figure out what it is they're looking for.
So that in a sense, to me at least, is a clear heuristic of like, I should spend time focusing on the sales piece and not once in getting distracted by those other pieces that I'm not great at. Or if I'm terrible at sales, then I should spend time finding someone who's great at sales to handle that for me so I can get back to building the product and still learning from customers maybe in a different way.
The market is so loud. It's so big and so loud.
Absolutely. Yeah. I want to talk briefly about AI because I feel almost remiss if we didn't. I don't actually always talk about AI on this. But given, well, I'm sure, but hey, we managed to make it through, but over an hour of not talking about AI, which I think is pretty good. Yeah. Given you talk about marketing and storytelling and brand building, and I think you also talk a lot about personalization as well. How does AI change that, right? The speed. How does it change with speed? How does it change all these different elements? What are the areas of where AI is massively improving things? How should entrepreneurs utilize it to tell their story, or be careful because of pitfalls?
I mean, it's a full conversation. One is you definitely don't want to be putting any of your proprietary IP into open platforms. You have to figure out a way to get some type of local or serviced large language model AI tool in some type of locked down situation for yourself so that you can really be as transparent as possible with it. I worry a lot about that aspect of it because if you have a team of more than one person, odds are they're probably doing that and not realizing what type of proprietary information they're putting into the system. Because as someone who demos this stuff day in and day out, uses it all the time, there's very little it doesn't know about most businesses and organizations or industries across the board. I get up on stages with very disparate audiences, from HVAC second generation family owners to people who run, managed service providers to whatever it might be. And when I just ask it in general, tell me the 10 things facing this industry and the 2 they should focus on, usually it's literally the agenda they would roll out for their board meeting. That's how good the information is. So one is, it's here, it's real. It's not something, whether it's hyped or overhyped, I don't think should be your concern, whether it's NVIDIA or OpenAI or Claude or Anthropic or Cohere or whoever. Let that be their business challenge for you. Take advantage of this moment in time. What does that mean? That's the secondary part, which is I don't love it from a creating standpoint. I love it from a research standpoint. I love it from a making me better standpoint. I love it from a better question standpoint. I love it from its ability to input a thought and have it steelman and strawman the argument. None of this works effectively if you aren't cogent, intelligent, and really understand your industry and your business. If you do and you are using it in that way, it is ultimately the best superpower you will ever use. I've created chatbots that are based by certain business brilliant minds that I know have a lot of public information out there. They're very prolific publicly. And because of that, I can't sit here and tell you that it's not one of the most dynamic business coaches I've ever encountered with speed and scale. And it's at the point where, for me, it's somewhat stranger. I mean, I've been publishing a lot of stuff online for a very long time. Its ability to understand me, my outputs, and how I think is, to me, very staggering. So when I speak to some of my peers and they go, hey, do you find that ChatGPT isn't as good as it used to be? I'm like, no, I find it's better than ever. But part of the reality of it isn't in the algorithm and it's not in the LLM. It's in the fact that it has so much of my content. My content is probably greater than most executives in the world just because I've constantly put stuff out there in public. So my experience is not your experience or someone else's experience. All of those create a world where, and I keep referring to this article, I should remember if it was Psychology or Psychology Today, I don't remember. The title of the article was The End of I Don't Know.
Yep.
And that's what I think is so profound. Not to make me a smartass or I know more than others, but if I want to be really informed, and again, I want to be able to steelman or strawman arguments or poke holes or give me access to another industry or have me think in a different way. I mean, I'm just sitting here going, I don't care if we hit artificial superintelligence or artificial general intelligence. If we stopped today and it was only as good as it is or was this morning, I'm pretty good with that forever.
Yeah, it's pretty damn impressive. What is, as a founder and entrepreneur, have you built, it sounds like you kind of have your own, projects and ChatGPT, things like that, your coach. I want you to be the coach who's all these other people in the world to try to be like that. Or have you also built the Mitch Joel version of your
I don't have to build the Mitch Joel version because my stuff is so public. I think if I had a massive private archive, I would have. But the answer is yes and to all of that. I use it for very pedestrian tools. Just look at this article I'm about to publish and create a keyword list for me so that I don't have to just go through the article and come up with keywords. I'll use it to A/B test titles for articles, which I don't think I'm that good at. I'm tired of using stock photography, so I love using it to create prompts and create images that support the work that I do. I'll use it for timelines and podcast notes and things that are just basic copy. And then I'll use it at scale. I wrote this article. Tell me what I should think about. Tell me what I'm missing. Here's the 3 articles I am using for the radio hit that I do every single week. What might be some of my additional perspectives that I'm not thinking about? I'll often use it to jam on ideas. Literally, I'm on the radio and these radio hosts can be quite aggressive, especially because I'm very pro-tech and they're usually not. I'll ask it, what would be some of their angles? And so when they ask those questions, I'm somewhat ready for a rebuttal. So think about that. I've used this, by the way, for sales, where I literally have a chatbot that is a sales negotiator with me.
Yeah.
It comes on as a prospective client, and we go back and forth. And then it tells me at each input where I did right, where I did wrong, how to think about it based off of certain sales experts that are in public domain that their work is readily available. So it's just never, I look at it and think it's not something I can imagine not having anymore.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Speaking of some of that stuff, kind of almost go to good storytelling principle. Let's go back to kind of almost where we started a little bit. And you mentioned to me about how, part of excellence is staying consistent with things, continuous reading, continuous learning, staying on top of stuff. Why do you think some people fail at that, right? You're clearly at the cutting edge, using all these things in a real way. I'll use a clear example. So I actually met with someone yesterday. He's a 20-year-old guy. He quit college. He's out here building things. He said, at the company he's working at, he is top tier company, well-known brand. Everyone in his team thinks he's working 60 to 70 hour work weeks. He's like, no, I'm doing closer to 20 or 30. They love my output. He's like, I'm telling them how I'm doing it too, right? With all these things, everyone he worked with is probably 30-ish years older than him. And I was literally like, are any of them using this? Are they asking questions about how you're doing this? He's like, no, they're not that curious. Are they? And I was like, are they going to be employed in 5 years? And his take was no. And I tend to agree. Why do you think people like that, right? These senior people later in their career, kind of coasting on their success, arguably, don't have that level of curiosity that you and I have. And I think great entrepreneurs still have. And why is that? And maybe generalize that to lots of people, frankly.
It's very hard to have humility, especially when confronted with generative AI. It's very hard to have humility, to think about how many years did I go to school? How many years did I have an advanced degree? What mud did I sludge through to get to this position in the executive suite? And you're telling me that with a prompt, something can quote unquote replace me, or that there's something else coming around the bend. I've seen it all. I've done it all. There's this confidence that comes with experience that can sometimes delude. It's the same reason why great companies fail. It's the same reason. It's all connected. Going back to my fear and insecurity, that's probably been my protective shield. Because I live in that world of imposter syndrome and why me, that perhaps maybe it's held me back from being that person or having that experience or that level of success. Maybe it's possible. But maybe it's the thing that's kept me on this course to be able to do that. When I'm confronted with people, there is a certain shield that they put on, this mask that they wear, that falls into a whole bunch of areas around perception, how they're perceived, how they think. I think it's created a culture at work that has made it what it is in terms of, bring your whole self to work. It's like, don't bring your whole self. Nobody wants the whole self at work. It's a professional environment. We use words like that too. So when I see that, I don't feel bad, and I don't go like, oh, I just don't think people have the humility to recognize that actually what they did is accomplished and good and positive, but maybe it wasn't that hard. Maybe it is really replicable. Maybe it doesn't take much of a leap to have it be something that's way smarter than we are or what we do. And that's a tough thing to swallow, because we want to think that what we do is unique, that we're unique, that we're great, that we have. And the answer is, you might be. The likelihood is probably the opposite. So what can you do to bring that into more real is exposure. It's exposure to other voices, to other ideas. My big thing has been, and I feel again, as I get older, that it's sometimes harder to pay attention to what the young people are doing. And I've inverted that. I actually spend all of my time just hearing them talk on TikTok and hearing them, how they use Snap and how they're writing on Medium and how they're putting stuff out on Substack. Because the truth of the matter is, I can look back in my short life and think, I remember having that, and you can signal spot. Oh, like I used to say crazy stuff like that too, or that's stupid. Or I can stop and say, that was crazy and that was stupid. I did the same thing, but I was right.
Yep.
Which is the other part. I was right about not always right, but in that situation about the digitization, where the world is going, I was right. Maybe they're right. And that's what made me successful might make them. So it's being open to all of that. And the only way to be open to it, I think, is more than reading and watching and listening. I always say that that's like 1/3 of it. To me, when you're reading or watching, it's also like I'm sitting here with this, like I'm taking physical notes, even though it's an Apple Pencil on an iPad, I still write physical notes based off of something smart Adam said that I might want to write down. That's 2/3 of it. The other part of it is that I'm creating something. Again, that could be a slide. It could just be a note in my Apple Notes. It could be a piece of a keynote. It could be an article. It could be a guest that I'm going to now have on the podcast, a book that I'll read, an article I should check out. Like that as like a way to think about it of I'm consuming, I'm thinking and crystallizing, and then I'm outputting. Could be a podcast, could be an article, could be a post on X. Like, I don't know. That flow to me is the antidote to the problem of confidence. I must know because we've done this, I mean, how often have you heard it? We've always done it. Like, where did the term "we've always done it this way" come from? It's come from people like that.
Yep. Yeah, which is a terrible term in a sense, right? Because so many people, you have to keep pushing yourself. And yet, once again, I think this is a human condition in many cases where people don't do that. I mean, even this guy who's an AI native, right? Clearly pushing the boundaries. I said, how many people at his university are in the mindset that he has, where they're using AI on a regular basis every day? I said, well, maybe 20%, which on some ways you could say is high. On the other hand, I'm shocked that it's not 80% or 90%.
Business, it's something like 8 to 12% or something like that.
Which is also shocking. So how do companies, and maybe this is sort of a quick question around company culture that leads to the greatest success too, how do companies keep that mindset? Because we, at my company, we deal with this sometimes where we try to keep telling people, you need to keep learning, you need to keep using these tools. We do lunch and learns, we talk about this sort of stuff. And yet it's really hard, right? People get worried, well, is this going to take my job? Am I going to be out of a job because I'm not doing this? I'm like, no, I have no interest in letting anyone go. However, if you aren't 20, 30, 40, 50% more productive in a year or two because of all the tools we're putting in front of you and talking to you about, then yes, you probably will be because you want to stand still and the world is moving forward. But that is a mindset clearly that isn't just people at my organization, it's worldwide, it's founders, it's people at university who should be at the cutting edge of these things. And yet, professors are fighting against using AI in class. So how do you create a culture that pushes the boundaries of innovation and wants their team to keep learning and building and have everyone be an entrepreneur?
I'm tempted to be very self-serving and tell you that Thinkers One is the answer to that, but it's not, but it is from the philosophical perspective, which is what I try to do with Thinkers One is create a way for people like you to very easily be able to go to choose the topic or thought leader that is you want to bring forward, click a button, tell them what you need, and within a couple of days or based off of a lifetime, you'll be able to get essentially a customized TED Talk just for your team based off of what you need.
Amazing.
What do I mean by that, though, in terms of really answering the question, not doing a shill for my business, is going back to this idea of nobody wants to hear that they're not moving fast enough. I bet, Adam, I'm willing to guess that every single day you're encountered by team members, whether they're proactively telling you this or you're thinking it, is they need more of these inputs. Mm-hmm. And so you'll tell them things like, oh, like just like here's 6 videos from YouTube, or here's a subscription to Masterclass, or here, go take a creative live course, or hey, go to this conference. And as thankful as this employee is, they will still in their brains go, he just added 6 hours to my workday. Whether they love it or not, whether it's for their personal development, professional development, or beyond, that's what they'll do. And where I came to this idea was if we can make these thought leaders more accessible to everyday meetings, as I call it. But again, the real idea is what people really want every day is some type of spark that's going to keep them going in the direction and the momentum that we talked about. And that is the core idea, not just of the business, but of how I think. And so when I'm reading, I'm not thinking I'm Warren Buffett and I'm going to spend 7 hours today reading. I'm thinking between my 5K power walk in the morning and my morning coffee, I'm going to try to read 5 pages, knowing full well that 98% of the population won't. And that's going to be my fast forward.
Yep.
I can't afford to send everybody on my team to the big industry association, but for a couple bucks, I can bring someone super smart and give them 15 minutes during a meeting we were running anyways and have a conversation about it. And wow, what a cheap, cost-effective, fun way to actually do exactly that while not adding more stuff into their calendar. So this is what you need to think about: moments where you're not adding more time to the day. It's very hard for people to consume that.
So I agree. And then, but maybe tying this together to some extent, how does it end up being with, like, to your point, like, okay, yes, as an employer, I could go get a great sort of coach mini TED talk. That sounds wonderful. And yet even then, so many things I think will be over people's heads and they won't pay attention. And I use that to tie that together with some of the stuff we were talking about. I could also go create a Mitch Joel project on ChatGPT and ask it lots of questions and learn from it. And yet the likelihood is I won't do that.
You won't do that. And it's an unfair liability onto your team members, because the hardest part is then them coming up with questions. It's too hard for them. It's too much.
Why are people bad at questions? Like, this is something great. I feel like I practice this a lot. I love asking questions.
Well, again, this goes back to, why aren't most people great at public speaking? We've been doing this our whole lives. It's just
everyone's speaking publicly for forever.
Yeah. Why do you have so many votes? Like, I'm not sure I fully comprehend that. I'll give you a tangential example of this, which is, I got into the marketing industry. I was always in the marketing industry, but then I got really involved in the actual marketing industry. I got involved in, the trade publications and the association in general. And I'd specifically, oh, did you read the article by so-and-so? Oh, no, who's that? How can you be in this industry? We have 2 publications and you not know who the main journalist is who covers it. How's that about? So, like, when you ask those questions, I'm like, yeah, I'm with you on this side of your couch going, like, how is this possible? I agree with you. And yet the vast majority of people have no clue who the main journalists are in their industry, what the main association does. They've never gone to an event within theirs. Like, how is that possible? Like, it's the same thing I would keep asking, like, how is that possible? And the answer is because most people won't, and that's the opportunity. So you have to, one, assume that nobody is doing it, because most aren't. I mean, look, I've written 2 books. Is it hard to write a book? It's very hard to write a book. But before you write a book, you actually have to do 2 things more. One is you have to have some type of audience who would actually buy it if you wrote it, which is very hard to do, build an audience. And 2 is you have to actually write a book proposal if you want to get it published by a publisher. And that's convincing someone that without even writing it, just reading a little part of it, that they'll want to publish this book. Then writing a book, not easy. Selling a book, getting people to buy a book, really, really hard. But the hardest thing is getting them to actually read it. So why do people buy books they don't read at them? Well, that's the question.
It makes them feel good. It feels like they're.
Yeah. By the way, the irony of this is Freakonomics had a great episode. I always talk about this, where they were looking to parenting, what makes somebody a great parent. And it wasn't the person who read a bunch of parenting books. It was the person who just bought the parenting books.
Just the idea.
The idea that you're thinking about what does it mean to be a good parent already puts you on course to be a great parent. So there's also that.
Well, I think the average is the average American reads less than 1 book a year or something like that, and probably far lower. So one, just because it's a pet peeve of mine, I want to ask: remote versus in person versus hybrid. What are your perspectives on that? Just as a leader, thought leader, or someone who've interviewed a lot of folks.
So it's a fortuitous question, because just this week I published a conversation I had with Peter Capelli, who is an expert in this space at Wharton. And he wrote a book called In Praise of the Office, which very much validated a lot of the things I was thinking about. But if I'm being honest, I was scared to say out loud.
Okay.
I'm sitting here recording this in a 1,000 square foot office that I share with my business partner, who is never here. This office is physically 8-minute walk from my house, and I have a beautiful home office that is lovely to work in, no issues there. And yet I show up here every day, usually before 9, and I usually leave sometime after 5. For what? I don't know. I make meetings every day to meet somebody for coffee, not just a friend, but somebody related to work or lunch. Keith Ferrazzi, Never Eat Alone, big fan of that work as well. Why do I do that? I don't know. I don't know if it's the olds, just what I'm used to. I don't know if it's my work style. I don't know if it's the type of work that I do that is better when I do it like this. And it's led me to this place where I almost feel it's like the next generation of pharma. In pharma, we talk about, like, how is it that you and I are taking the same dose of acetaminophen? Like, we probably, my biochemistry, your chemistry issues you have, shouldn't we personalize medicine's the future? They do the Star Trek body scan. They write the prescription, and you just drink this little vial, and it's got all the stuff you need.
I have a ChatGPT project with all my health data. It'll give me personalized advice. All right.
Right. And so it's interesting that we are now in a place where we have all of these options. And so we're asking as employees for this personalized work experience in a world that is vastly unprepared to provide that. I believe that that's the friction. And it is true that you can work from anywhere. I have. It is true that you can build a culture across multiple offices in different countries with different time zones. I've been a part of that and done that. It is also true that you can set up a bunch of cool video cameras so that you can wave to your team from Montreal to Toronto and then hop on a plane an hour and a half later, wave back to the team from the Toronto office to Montreal, which I've done prior to Zoom and COVID. That's what we had. We had these, we talked about it being one office with a very long hallway. It was the joke that we used. It's true. We've had FTEs and we've had freelancers and we've had people working on contract and we've built great cultures. It's possible. And I think it's also possible that you can all work remotely and build a great company and there could be absolutely no culture. I think you'd be part of an organization where some of you are remote, some of you are hybrid, some of you show up and then you meet every couple of weeks on a lounge rooftop bar and people walk by not even knowing that those are their coworkers. I think that that's true.
Yeah.
And ultimately, where I think people professionally develop the most is in the cracks, not in the sidewalk. It's in the cracks. It's in the executives are looking out onto the office because there's a new project and Adam walks by and they go, Adam, come in here for a second. It's your ability, Adam, to walk over and see me and whether I'm wearing my headphones or not, saying to me, I'm working on this. I was thinking of you, right? Steve Jobs infamously put these bathrooms in between departments, long walks away from where you were operating. So people would have what he called these collisions. We used to give Glassdoor ratings to the Google campus and the Googleplex and the Meta Lab. There's all of these things that now suddenly have become somewhat verboten and like those are terrible places. I don't know where I net out on it other than saying that when I am not interacting with people, it's very challenging for me. That as much as I love recording and seeing your face here on Riverside, I think this would have been a very different conversation if we were doing it across the actual table.
Yep.
That sometimes going for a coffee with somebody is the most advanced form of professional development you'll ever see. And I haven't seen many people do the greatest of work in isolation. I just haven't. So I don't know if that answers the question, but it gives you a spectrum of what we need to think about in a world where people are making absolute decisions based off of very little information. Meaning, I was sent home to work as a COVID, and I guess I can keep doing that. You were never sent home to work with the training and tools that are going to make you, based off of decades of people doing this, the best at this. And we just perpetuated a model of not working from home, but at home working.
Yeah, no, it's really well said. And, so look, I'm very pro remote, but one, this reminds me, I need to do a deeper dive on how we can keep getting better at it, number one, and make sure we're constantly staying better. But number two, I do think there's an interesting debate whether all the things you said all make sense. As a net for a company, though, when you can hire the best people anywhere in the world and not have a cost of an office and other things, can you net as a business, as an economic force, be better than the alternative? Now, I think if we have to guess, it's probably net equal to some extent, right? Like the companies in person can maybe move faster. And
I would just dump back a thought of, are you hiring people to do tasks or are you hiring people to be part of something that's going to build something different?
Yeah.
So I don't think it's just the mechanics of that, because the mechanics of that, you're 100%, there's no argument from me at all. The question is, are these people who are doing fundamentally tasks, or are they people in which we are doing so much that there's something greater that can come out of this? And I don't know the answer to that in a world where I would make an argument that we've really optimized in terms of work as much as we can as a society. It's not like we just got to a place where we have these tools and we're doing it. We've optimized. And so I don't know. I mean, it is possible. Of course it's possible, but it's also possible that we don't know what the delta might be if we were all in this. So I don't know. I just don't have and the general consensus is that this idea of sidewalks or in the cracks, that while you can do certain things to make the cracks go away, it's not the same as analogy that I'd like to say is, yeah, I'm a big music guy, obviously. Do I like watching clips of concerts on YouTube? I do. Do I like it when someone records something in high def and it's the full show? I do, is that completely different experience to me walking down to the arena here and experiencing that with 50, like, I don't know how many talks you've seen on YouTube versus when you're in the room at the conference and you're like,
So it's a different emotional response.
so are they both good? Yeah. Are they both the same? Nah, they're not.
It's well said. They're not both the same. And one thing, the net is harder to understand. I do think it's really important for early teams when you're smaller earlier to be together because you're really innovating. The moment you start expanding, it maybe becomes a different story. I mean, I had a call with a partner of ours yesterday, and they had 4 people on the call. One was in an office. All the others were remote and dialing in. I'm like, well, why have the office? This person sitting in a conference room by themselves. And it's like, is that really a win?
This is the argument though, Adam, right? You have many people who are, as they're forced to RTO, what they're saying is I'm essentially going to the office and doing the same thing at home because not everyone's there. So I'm just sitting on Zoom calls there versus there. Are you doing tasks or is something else happening? That's the management question.
So let's do a quick lightning round about things. I'm starting to do these more and more. We'll see if it's good.
Yeah,
you're a prolific reader. Is there a book every entrepreneur should read, or maybe podcast they should listen to, or writer they should subscribe to? Like one thing you say, like this is where you should go for your most worthwhile information.
For that audience, I feel like the podcast Acquired is very interesting.
That's great.
While understanding that every episode you are listening to an anomaly. So now don't just look at it as the roadmap, listen to it or watch it with the spirit of what can I learn from this anomaly?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think Founders is similar, by the way.
Yeah, the Founders Acquired, both great. Yeah.
What's the most underrated skill in the age of AI that people don't have and should work on?
Being human. Being human in the sense of, it ties into what we just spoke about, which is commune. We do need community and to be together. And don't dismiss that. Don't miss a chance to grab a coffee, to go to that patio, to reach out to somebody on LinkedIn, to go to the industry association event, to physically, as I like to say, in our protein forms, do things together. It's very, very powerful. And those bonds, especially in the digital AI world, are multiplied.
Yeah. What's the biggest myth about like innovation or storytelling that you think is sort of a myth?
A myth is that anybody can do it. I don't think anybody can do it. I think it is a complex, difficult, challenging skill. And if anybody could do it, every ad would perform a lot better.
Right. And people mess that up all the time. What's a daily habit that sharpens your focus?
I'm a creature of habit. So I would go with 100%. I wake up early and I go for a walk. And listen to podcasts and things like that. There is something about morning that's still dark and the breaking of the sun that just, it fills me with a lot of energy. And I feel like if nothing happens during the day beyond that, and the day is a complete and utter failure, that's of value to me. And definitely just spending time with very quiet music, reading on subjects that are longer and harder than I care for.
Yeah. This is probably hard to answer this question, given what you do, but if you weren't doing what you do now, what would you be building or what would you do instead?
It's a tough one for me. I feel like I would be learning the skills where I feel like I have the gaps. So video would be one of them. Like, I feel like I'd be spending time figuring out how to like edit and shoot and do that. Like, that seems like a fun thing to me. How to like optimize the podcast in terms of audience building and things like that. It's the stuff that I usually had some scaffolding around that I no longer have because I'm out on my own with my business partner and a couple of people helping us on the side. But it's like, what are the tangential skills that would really add value that I just don't have energy or time for right now?
Yeah, fair. Last question. I ask everybody, if there's a single piece of advice you could give to every entrepreneur for excellence, what would you boil that advice down to, or what would it be?
Said it before, I'll say it again. Your network is your net worth.
Yeah, 100%. Mitch, it is such a pleasure being here with me today. Thank you. As you mentioned early on, like, time is our most precious commodity. Thank you for sharing a bunch of it with us. We can't get it back. So thank you for spending it with me.
Thank you for not wasting it. I appreciate the time, Adam.
Absolutely. How can people get in touch? How can they learn all about you and get more information if they want to go deeper and get some people to inspire their teams?
please check out thinkersone.com and send me a note and let me know what I'm doing wrong or what I'm doing right. And then just go to thinkingwithmitchjoel.com or Google Mitch Joel, and you will see in there everything. That is the archive of the show, my writing, which every week I definitely create a lot of content because I'm thinking a lot and trying to share a lot.
Excellent. Mitch, thank you again. So appreciated.
Thanks, Adam. Appreciate your time.